Hey Ann, how are you?
I'm well, how are you?
Really good. I'm so excited for our conversation today.
Because you said you needed stock tips.
I do,
right?
I looked at my Roth IRA and I was like, I need to speak to Ann, find out what's going on.
Wrong podcast.
Oh, dang it. We're here to talk about stock because we're talking about fundamentals and some of the basics. And so we're turning the tables a little bit. Usually you're doing the interviewing, but I'm going to be talking to you today because stock's important.
Yes, absolutely. One of the basics, absolutely something that a beginner cook should be able to wrap their brain around.
Is it overstating it to say that stock is one of the fundamentals of cooking, and just kind of start introducing us to why stock is so important?
So definitely a fundamental, in culinary school, it was one of the first things we did, knife skills and making stocks and understanding the difference between stock and broth, and, understanding what all goes into a classic stock. So yes, the simple answer is yes. It is something, if someone is committed to learning how to cook, it is definitely something they should commit some time to learning how to make a good stock.
And is it scary? Is this going to be like scary, important, very difficult to do, or is this going to be easy to master?
So I'm going to need everyone to carve out about 12 hours and find the largest pot you can. So when you look at the classic applications of stock and you look at, you might run across some websites or blogs or things like that that say, there's only one way to do it. This is the only right way to do it. I can see where that would be a little off-putting or a little intimidating. So while a good stock does take some time, there are definitely things we can do to get folks there faster and make it feel like it's something that is doable, because in the end, the effort is worth it. It is definitely going to make a better, a more delicious gravy or sauce or soup.
And speaking of applications, you already just said gravies and soups. What are some of the other things where we might use some stock to sort of save the day?
So, thinning out a sauce is something that you're going to use a stock with, and making a sauce because you're looking for a really specific flavor profile on a sauce. If you sort of are moving from one brand of store-bought stock to another, it can really affect the end result of that sauce and what it tastes like. So having a super clean, unsalted stock that you've made yourself is really helpful in getting that end result of that very flavorful sauce.
And you did just say a word that I'm going to come down a little bit later, but that is store-bought, because I'm sure that is an area of interest / controversy.
And I'm not knocking store-bought stocks, and I certainly understand. I'm busy. I understand how hard it is to get in the kitchen, and so there are some good ones that we can guide folks to and certainly put in the show notes, and we can talk about that later on. So I'm not a snob when it comes to homemade stock. I'm more from a place of it's worth you carving out some time to do it because of what your end result will be.
Cool. Okay. So, and we'll, like you said, we'll get to those in just a minute here.
Sure.
So, can we define some terms just to get started with? We are calling this stock options. We're not calling this broth options.
Right.
So, tell us what is the difference between broth and stock?
So, stock is typically made from bones of meat, and some meat can be attached to those bones, but it's mostly bones. And they can either be raw or cooked, although there is talk in some of the food world that says if you've cooked it, it's a broth. But technically, when you go to culinary terms, culinary writing books, you'll see that those bones can be either cooked or raw. When you cook them, first of all, you get a different flavored stock, a really flavorful stock, and you get a darker color. But a stock is mostly bones with some meat attached, and you are typically looking for bones that have smaller bones that have lots of moving parts. So say a wing that has 3 parts to it, so that you're getting lots of that collagen that's going to come out of those bones. So first of all, bony pieces, and then second, a longer cooking time. A broth, it can have bones, but it's mostly made from a larger piece of meat. So something like a chicken breast is one of my favorite ways to make broth. I'll poach chicken breast, boneless, skinless chicken breast, as we talk about so much on this podcast. It's not my favorite cut.
I can't even believe you brought it up, but yes, keep going.
Right. But it is a great piece of meat to use. I add some spices in there and a little bit of aromatics from onion, carrot, celery, and end up with a really great broth that's great for sipping or making another type of soup. So a broth is going to have more larger pieces of meat.
Okay.
And it's a shorter cooking time. So it's something you can get to quickly and makes a really flavorful liquid that is a great thing to know how to do and have in your back pocket, especially if you're sick. A great way to get yourself close to a chicken soup, for sipping when you're not feeling well. Although I make broth all the time to use in a curry, as the liquid in a curry, just simply because I don't have any stock on hand and I don't have the time to make a stock.
I see. I have to say, I think I'm a growing cook, let's say, because I'm part of Smidgen here.
Yes.
So I think that, do you find that some people have the misconception that it's like concentration that makes the difference between a broth and a stock?
Yes, for sure. So what you're getting in terms of viscosity between a broth and a stock has nothing to do with any sort of reduction of the liquid. It has to do with the amount of collagen that is located in those bones. So when you make that stock and then you refrigerate it the next day, it's sort of like a thin jello sort of consistency. That's from collagen. It's from the cooking time because it's the time required to extract that collagen from those bones. But what's causing that thickness is from the collagen in the bones.
So consistency here.
Consistency. So you're not going to get there with a broth because you're using less bones and more of that piece of meat. By the way, when you're making that broth from that piece of meat, be sure to eat that protein. That's not something, in a stock you discard those bones. But when you're making a broth, if that piece of meat, I'm chopping that poached chicken to either put back in that broth as a soup, or I may use that poached chicken for like chicken salad or something like that. So that's another big differentiation of when you're making a broth versus a stock. You don't see a lot of stocks being made from turkey. Certain proteins don't lend themselves to an all-purpose stock. If you're going to use your Thanksgiving Day turkey to make a stock, you're going to be making turkey gumbo.
Well, that's what I was thinking. This is the classic. That's where most people would be doing something like this. On the regular, is like that would be part of the tradition, is the next day after Thanksgiving, there goes the carcass into the big soup pot.
Exactly. So you are making a stock at that point because there's lots of bony pieces. One thing that I do think that happens with that chicken stock, and a lot of times I refer to it as chicken broth, is because you may not do that long simmer to extract all that collagen. It may be something that you only work with for maybe 2 to 4 hours versus that longer cook time that's required to make that stock, to pull all that collagen out of there. So but here's the thing, let's not get lost in all this terminology. Let's not everyone get nervous about the rules. If you are putting a piece of chicken in some water with an onion and carrots and a few spices and making a flavorful liquid, you just did it right, no matter what it's called. If you're cooking from whole ingredients, if you're giving this a shot, then you're doing it right.
Excellent. I love how you always give us the rules, but then you also empower us to bend those rules as need be. That's great.
So I know when I talked just now about this 4, 6, maybe 8 hour cook time, a lot of people just clicked and went away. Let me tell you how you're going to get there. And it's what we do at Red Stick Spice all the time. We put those ingredients, whether we're making a vegetable stock or a chicken stock. We most often make vegetable stock, but whatever the case, our crock pot on low is the heat, the perfect heat for a stock. So with a stock, there are some rules with stock that we want to go over that are important to follow. They're not difficult ones. And one is that that stock shouldn't boil. And it really shouldn't have an aggressive simmer even. You want something called a lazy bubble. And that's where that bubble, that simmer, is only popping up a bubble every few seconds. So if you have a very, very specific stove and you have the time, that 6-8 hours, to be home and take care of it, that's great. If not, the crock pot on low gives you that lazy bubble. And that's how we make stock. So we make stock once a week at Red Stick Spice, and that's the stock we use all week in our cooking classes. So what goes into that stock, that's another few set of rules. Again, I don't want anyone to get nervous because it's really, really
rules, air quotes.
Yeah, not hard to follow rules. So when it comes to vegetable stock, we're pretty picky about what goes into it. So all of our onion peelings, including the onion paper and garlic paper, go into our zip top bag for our stock bag that we have all the time going at Red Stick Spice. And it lives in our freezer. So onion peelings and the onion paper, along with garlic trimmings and garlic paper. So the paper of the onion and garlic have a ton of flavor. And they also give the stock a little bit of color. So definitely don't discard those. Celery trimmings, with the exception of the root end, which always seems to be sandy. So that is something that needs to go in the compost bin or garbage can. We wouldn't want to put that into the stock because we do need to keep the rules: garbage in, garbage out. So it's not trash soup, it's a stock. So we've got celery trimmings, but not that root end. So celery leaves are going into that stock for sure. Although, everybody,
I was going to say, wait a minute.
Let's eat our celery leaves. So that's a great thing. I eat celery leaves on salads. I use them as a stand-in for a sweet herb. If I'm short on herbs, celery leaves come in really handy there. And then carrot. But we need to think about our classic mirepoix ratio. So mirepoix is that French fundamental aromatic mixture of carrot, onion, and celery. And your carrot's always at half the amount of the onion and celery because carrots are very sweet, they're high in sugar, and that flavor can kind of take over. So we want to make sure as we look at that zip top bag, we're eyeballing it. No one's getting a scale out here. We're just eyeballing it and saying, do I have more onion and celery than I do carrot? And then you're just fine. I don't put carrot peelings in because I'm thinking about surface area. And a lot of carrot peelings are allowing a lot of water to reach the surface area of that carrot, again, making it, in my opinion, a little too sweet. So this is more about chunks of carrot. So I just look at my bag, make sure I have more onion and celery than I do carrot. And then parsley stems. So parsley stems, first of all, if they're tender, you can chop them in with your parsley and use them in your dish, and you'll be just fine. But if you have an excess of parsley stems, those are excellent and actually a part of a classic mixture that goes into a bouquet garni, that goes into a stock. And then we throw in a couple of peppercorns and a few allspice and a bay leaf. And that is our vegetable stock. We don't use bell pepper, we don't use asparagus or any other vegetable that would bring that flavor forward. So some broccoli in a stock is going to make it very broccoli forward, which is fine if all you're making is broccoli soup. But just remember that asparagus or bell pepper or broccoli or cauliflower, they're very forward in their flavors. So what we want is a nice flavorful liquid that doesn't say anything in particular. Just good savory flavor. That onion and garlic is going to bring some umami, a little bit of sweetness from the carrot and celery. And that is, when it comes to rules, those would be the basics for that vegetable stock. With those same vegetables to make chicken stock, I would have, let's say I butchered a whole chicken and I had the back of the chicken, or wing tips if I were trimming up wings. You know, all of those have all of those bony parts that pull lots of collagen out and give that stock body. And so that would go into my crock pot. We leave it overnight with that lazy bubble, and then we strain off everything, either compost or discard what you strain off, and then that's our stock for the week.
I'm just loving the idea of waking up in the morning and the crock pot has been going all night and it just smells like somebody's been cooking all night. That must be glorious.
It is absolutely amazing. It's a great smell. One other thing I want to say about the onion is we have put trimmings and skins from purple onion in the stock. Really delicious, but you do get a dark brown stock. So just know that your stock's going to be very dark.
So it sounds like there's a theme here. If it's something that's very pronounced, it's going to be anything that's sort of dominant, you're going to really see that in the stock, whether it's the flavor or the coloring.
Exactly. Exactly.
Now, because I'm listening very closely to Smidgen, I want to know, is there any oil added at this time? Any fat added at any time? And what about our friend salt when you're making your stocks?
So traditionally there would be no oil or fat, although, you know, there's fat on the meat attached to the bones. There's probably not going to be completely clean bones going into that stock. So there is meat attached, but in terms of any additional fat, butter or oil or anything like that, you wouldn't add anything there. In terms of salt, I don't add salt. I tend to be a little heavy-handed with salt when I'm cooking, and I tend to be a little impatient with salt. So a lot of times my salt hasn't dissolved, and I'm already adding more salt, and then I get to a point on occasion where I oversalt. In terms of the fundamental rules, the very classic rules would say no salt. I'm here to say if that makes you happy, salt your stock. There are even experts who say that salt can help draw out more collagen, and it definitely makes for a more flavorful liquid. Now, when I'm making a broth, you know, definitely salt goes in at the end, especially if it's something I'm going to sip or use in a soup. So then, yes, definitely salt's going in. But that is my one issue with some store-bought salts, is that they are too salty, and that really poses a problem in the dish, especially if you're a novice and you're following that recipe to a T, and you've added the stock and you've added the salt. You've suddenly oversalted your dish. So in terms of store-bought salt, that would be my sort of one rule, is always go for unsalted store-bought stock. Making it at home, I say, you like salt, you know, salt your stock, press on, you know. It depends on what comment section you're reading and what rabbit hole you went down, whether or not you should salt that stock. But I say, if you're salting your stock, if you're making stock homemade and you add some salt, again, you're not doing it wrong.
You're empowering us again. This seems like a low stakes experiment. We can try it maybe one or two ways.
Without a doubt. These are things that predominantly go in the garbage bin.
Right.
You know, you got to be a little picky about the things that are going in the garbage bin, but absolutely, you are not out a whole lot of groceries when you are trying your hand at some stock.
So I've seen at Red Stick Spice Company that you have the Ziploc bag, that's the freezer bag. It's in the freezer and it just kind of gets loaded up.
Yes.
So when you were actually making this, how much water are you putting in? With, like, just imagining that gallon freezer bag, how much water?
So it's a gallon freezer bag. We let it get loaded pretty full, and our crock pot is 8 quarts. So I would say that would be, again, we're not using any precise science or weights or measures here, but I would say from that zip top bag, you could definitely get 8 quarts of stock from there. A couple of other things about stock is that you always start stock in cold water, so which is perfect for the crock pot, because you just load it up from the zip top bag, put in some tap water, and you're good to go. But on the stove top, you just start everything in cold water, bring it up to that very, very low simmer without letting it boil. You're not really hurting anything, but the boiling could extract flavors from some vegetables, some items quicker than others, and just maybe not get as subtle of a stock at the end. And also it can create cloudiness. And clear, that's one of the things you're graded on in culinary school, is how clear is your stock.
Okay.
You know, if you use cloudy stock at home, don't worry, the culinary school police are not gonna knock on your door, it'll be just fine. But those are the reasons behind not starting it in cold water and not letting it boil.
Very good. How long does stock or broth stay fresh in your fridge?
So I would use it within 7 to 10 days. It is very freezable. So freezing in, we freeze in 1 cup portions at Red Stick Spice. We're almost always using more than 1 cup, depending on what we're making, but it's nice to know we can grab from the freezer in those 1 cup portions. You can also freeze in, I see this a lot in ice cube trays.
That's what I was gonna say. I know people who have their special stock ice cube trays, and that is what they freeze ice cubes of stock.
So that makes sense to me in a sauce making application, because you're typically not making a gallon of sauce, you're making a saute pan of sauce. So that small amount of stock makes sense in that application.
And then you can, you can use 2 or 3
Absolutely, yeah.
ice cubes at a time there.
And they're also handy to store, because once they're frozen, you can
pop them back in another freezer bag.
Exactly, and then they're ready to go, yeah.
So Anne, you're always really paying attention to what people are doing with trends and what is kind of coming in, and I'm sure people come into the store all the time and they have very specific questions about things they've heard about or whatever. So I'm going to say a phrase to you, and I want you to kind of take us on this journey. Why is everybody talking about bone broth?
Okay, so bone broth is a highly nutritious liquid that you make from bones. Let me answer your first question. They're talking about it because it is a big part of the low carb and keto world, and it is very, very good for you, and lots of people are sipping it. There's intermittent fasting involved with the keto diet, where in some instances sipping bone broth is allowed during the fast, so it's helping people stave off hunger and get through their fast. I was fascinated by it because it sort of is this, it's not a broth, first of all, because you're using...
I just learned it's a stock.
Yeah, it's a stock, essentially, but it is a much longer cooking stock. So this is one you do need to make a commitment to spend several hours making this. But bone broth really requires bones that have a very large quantity of collagen in them. So these are big bones, typically from cows.
I was going to say, is this beef or?
Yeah,
okay.
Typically from cows, and you can go to your butcher and ask for large bones to be cut in a way so that they need to be cut in a way so that that collagen is exposed, so then the water can then extract that collagen out. I have found in Latin markets to be a great place to buy bones for bone broth. They have soup bones that they cut in a certain way, and I've gotten them at Latin markets to make bone broth. So the first step is that the bones need to be boiled, and it brings out all these impurities that are in the bones that are not attractive to look at, but it can also lend an off flavor, sort of a bitter, not clean flavor to the bone broth. Then they need to be roasted. So then you roast them, and you're roasting them at a very, very high heat. We're talking above 425 degrees, and you are really getting them very, very, very brown. And then it goes in to your stock, into your water to make the bone broth.
So it's like we're resetting and we're starting from the roasted now.
Right.
Oh, wow.
So, and then the cook is very long. I've seen anything from 8, I've seen some where they say you need to cook for 24 hours. And again, at that very, very low simmer with that lazy bubble. So what I do is I do sip bone broth on occasion. I salt it at the end. I don't salt it during the cooking process. I add the seasonings that go into the Vietnamese soup pho. And so we have a blend in the store called Pho Dinner, right? And I put that in a cheesecloth pouch, and I drop it into, for that entire cook time, I'm also simmering it with these spices. There could be some, anti-inflammatory benefits happening there, but mainly I do it for flavor. I love pho, and it just makes me happy to sip bone broth that has those little hits of ginger and star anise and that little Szechuan peppercorn. Yeah. So I drop that in there. You can also add aromatics. There's just know that after that very long cook time, they are going to be cooked to smithereens. That celery and onion, it's going to be just obliterated. So you are going to have to do some straining. Otherwise, you've got this sort of mush of vegetables in there. So the thinking behind, as I describe that whole process, immediately my brain goes to, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to make a lot. I'm going to carve out, this is going to be a weekend project.
It's going to take 2 days to make, so we're doing it.
And I'm going to make a lot of it. So that is why the bone broth business is so big, because what I just described, while it's not difficult, I can certainly see where that would be challenging for some folks. So there are, many local butchers are making bone broth, which I think is just wonderful. We have a local butcher who's doing it, and a great convenience product. But if you can carve out those couple of days, or that I would just say a day, not 2 days, you're a full Saturday. That's your Saturday project. It's so worth it. Just make a whole lot of it.
Again, the benefit of the aroma, I'm just thinking.
Yeah, it's so comforting.
Well, yeah, all of this is hitting all these comfort food notes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what's, and sometimes when I talk, I'm of a certain age, and I feel a little bit like, get off my lawn. But, none of this is new. This is what my mother and grandmother were doing. Now we've lucky for us that these health experts have figured out what the benefits of this is. But that whole thinking back to chicken soup for the soul, or, Jewish penicillin, all of that, they were all right, they were all correct. Just now our approach is a little bit different.
It doesn't last through the ages if it
Right.
doesn't have something to go with it.
Right.
I do feel obliged to ask, since we are in South Louisiana, but
Yes.
I'm thinking other people are curious too, fish bones?
So fish stocks, I don't make that often. I do rely on store-bought stocks for fish stock, and I don't use them often. What I do make on a regular basis, and so worth it, is a seafood stock made with shrimp. So we are so blessed in this part of the country to have a beautiful shrimp industry that it is a industry that does a lot of quick freezing. So that is a convenience product for us here in South Louisiana, that we can buy Gulf shrimp frozen. And so I buy them with the peel on, and I peel them and, of course, use the shrimp to make a delicious dish. But the peelings go into a pot with cold water and a few aromatics, and in less than 30 minutes, you have shrimp stock. As a matter of fact, if you cook it too long, it goes just a little bit too far. So, let me not be a rule maker here. I would think that if you were working with shrimp, if you have shrimp available to you, making a shrimp stock shouldn't be something you skip. That is something that, as soon as I start the meal and the shrimp get peeled, it's just on my back burner, just sort of doing its thing back there, and then that liquid is ready for that dish. I typically make shrimp stock for that meal, for that dish that I'm making, whether it's a pasta dish or a shrimp stew, or I do a butternut squash and shrimp soup, and that shrimp stock is used there. So that is something that is really, really doable for the home cook and comes together quickly.
It seems like with everything with seafood, it's like time is your enemy.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
Now, because we're breaking all the rules, and you already kind of gave us permission from the beginning, let's talk about store purchases of stock and broth.
Okay.
Some of the things to look for. Let's start with that. First of all, we have permission to buy.
Yeah, absolutely. So if that's what it means for you to get a meal cooked from whole ingredients on the dinner table, then let's just go toward some store-bought chicken stock in general. So first thing I look for is no sodium. Um, and a lot of times there are a convenience product called, they look like pastes, they're bases, and it looks like a paste, and you would take like a half a teaspoon or a teaspoon and then whisk that into water. A lot of times you really have to watch it with those. Those are loaded with sodium.
Okay.
And MSG, and this is another podcast, Catherine, but MSG is not
Right.
the evil, ingredient that a lot of people, that we've been led to believe. But anyway, a lot of those are loaded with sodium, unfortunately. However, in the butcher section at least in Baton Rouge, locally owned smaller grocery stores, there are bases in the behind the counter with the butcher, and those are a lot of times made by local folks, and those are often beautiful products. So that's worth seeking out, moving away from with stock, you're going to be on the aisle with the canned soup. That's where they store the stock. But a lot of times your butcher will have a base back there. That's a great product. So number one, you're looking for no sodium. Number two, see if there's something they're making that the butchers are making themselves, or is coming from a local artisan.
Okay.
That would be the next thing I would look for. And in terms of national brands, I'll just name a brand. Kitchen Basics is a brand that I turn to. They make a really nice line of carton stocks in a carton, and they all of them are have a salted and unsalted companion.
Nice.
So
Yeah, that's great.
and I find them readily available. So if I had to recommend one, that would be the one that I recommend.
It's good too, because you and I have talked about some of these soups that we're having the cooking segments on, or even we did a curry together.
Right.
And it's nice to be able to have just a carton in the pantry that can make your dinner happen.
Sure. My mom used to refer to something called a calamity plan. And
I like it.
So she worked multiple jobs, and we always ate as a family. I didn't think a thing of it when I was a kid. And it was partially because there just, we lived in a rural area. There just weren't a lot of restaurants. There also wasn't a ton of convenience food or packaged food. But also because I think it fit our budget for her to cook at home very often. So I just didn't really think anything of it. But she always referred to a calamity plan, having that pantry stocked with certain things that if that big meal she had planned fell apart, she could make something. So for you, if that calamity plan means having a carton of store-bought stock in your pantry, please, don't scrap the meal because, well, Ann said we needed to make that. I needed that lazy bubble. I should have started 24 hours ago.
Yeah. I can't believe this.
I boiled it and I didn't have a lazy bubble, so let's all load in the car, kids. No, if that's what it means to get a meal on the table is that carton stock, please, have that pantry loaded up with what you need.
Any closing stock thoughts that you have for our dear listeners?
I would just say, if you're out there reading lots of information about stock and it's getting overwhelming or getting confusing, I would say just step away and just go get an onion, lop it in half, a few stalks of celery, a couple of chunks of carrots, run some water in a pot and make some stock. Just give it a shot, sort of cull down the places you go to for information, and don't let it overwhelm you, and just give it a shot.
And this is something we can experiment with. It's low stakes. We can
Absolutely.
Try. And so what's the homework assignment? Get that freezer bag going right now?
Definitely get the freezer bag going, and then we really want to see these pictures and hear from folks.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, of what they're making. I want to see all those delicious soups and stews made with homemade stock.
We'll be looking for those, and maybe we can even share them on your social media and
Absolutely.
show off what people are doing. That would be really cool.
Absolutely.